Wine is a natural product. The earth made wine long before there were human beings to drink it, and we'll keep on making it long after we disappear. Grapes grow and ripen. The ripe berries fall to the ground and shatter. Yeast arrives and consumes the sugar in the juice. One of the byproducts of the yeast metabolization or fermentation of the sugar is alcohol, and so we have wine. Grape juice flavored alcohol. As humans got organized, we created vineyards to grow the grapes. Now, in the main scheme of things, making wine is not the beginning, but more towards the end of the process. Up to this point, starting in the spring, the vines have begun to grow, the buds have popped out, the grapes are formed and have ripened. In the fall, the grapes have been harvested, and now we're ready to start making the wine. In this episode, we're going to do a quick overview of how wine is made. While there are similarities in making red and white wine, there are some differences. Most of our attention will be on making of red wine. Before we dive in, at any time, if you like what you hear in the video, then click like, subscribe, and hit the little bell so you'll be notified when there's a new post. Also, make sure you share this with your friends. I'm sure they'd appreciate it. So here are the basic steps of making red wine. This may sound simple, but you start with a red or dark colored grape. The juice from almost all grape is clear. The color of the wine comes from the skin of the grapes. The first step is crushing and destemming the grapes. The crush is when the skins are broken to expose the meaty flesh and juice of the grape. Yeast will then have access to the sugar, the flesh, and the juice of the grape. At this point, the winemaker may remove all or some of the stems of the grapes. The stems, seeds, or those are called pips, and the skin is what contains the tannins. The juice, flesh, seeds, and whatever stems are there is called the must. The second step is adding yeast to the must. While yeast is natural on the skins of the grapes, many winemakers may not depend on the natural yeast, but will add just the right type of yeast to accelerate the fermentation process. The third step is the alcoholic or primary fermentation. Now, fermentation is when the sugar in the grape comes in contact with the yeast and is converted to alcohol and carbon dioxide. It's through fermentation that the must becomes wine. Now, during the fermentation process, there are several things that we need to be sensitive to. The kind of vessel that the fermentation process goes through has a bearing on the taste of the wines. Whether it's new oak, previously used oak, small barrels, large barrels, enormous barrels, all that has a bearing on the taste or flavor of your wine. Now, generally, stainless steel tanks or concrete do not. Also, the fermentation temperature and length of time is also a consideration. Now, as far as the temperature is concerned, this is a balancing act. Now, yeast is only effective within a certain temperature range. Too cold and the yeast will go dormant. Too hot and the yeast will die. Most red wines are fermented around 30 degrees Celsius or 85 degrees Fahrenheit. The duration is somewhat flexible in that it depends on the temperature of the must, the type of yeast being used, and the amount of sugar present in the grape. Once the sugar is gobbled up to the degree that the winemaker wants them to be, the fermentation process is over. This may take anywhere from several days to several weeks. How are you doing there? Is this information making sense? Is it helpful? If it is, write Asti in the comments below. Now, the next step is managing the skins. During fermentation, the skins, seeds, and whatever stems there are float to the top of the juice. The winemaker wants to keep the skins moist and in contact with the juice in order to extract color, flavor, and tannins to make it less susceptible to bacteria. The two basic ways to keep the skins in contact with the juice are what's called piellage, translated punching down, several times a day. The cap or the floating skins are pushed back down into the juice. Also, remontage, translated pumping over. This is done on a regular basis, and this is when the juice from the bottom of the tank is pumped up to the top of the tank, the skins or the cap. Now the next step is separating the juice and the solids. Once fermentation is complete, the winemaker drains the juice out of the fermentation tanks or vessels. The juice is called free-run juice. Free-run is considered the finest portion of the wine. The next step is to press down the solids. Now that the free-run juice is gone, the must is still wet with juice. The must is then pressed to extract the rest of the wine out of it. The wine here now is called pressed wine and can be blended with the free-run or discarded. Now the next step is malolactic or secondary fermentation, also known as MLF. This is done after the primary fermentation. Basically, it converts the natural malic acid in the wine into lactic acid through the use of a variety of bacteria. Now, malic acid has a similar taste of green apples, where lactic acid, for those of you who are familiar with dairy products, is softer and doesn't have a sharp, hard, harsh taste like malic acid. Now, the next to the last step for some producers is to mature the wine. Now, the goal here is to allow the wine to develop additional flavors. They use different kinds of vessels and blending processes to get the flavors that they want. Now, frequently, red wines are moved from one vessel to another. Now, this is called racking. Here, the wine is separated from sediment on the bottom of the barrel and exposes the wine to a little bit more oxygen. And then the final step is finishing. Just before bottling, some producers filter their wine. This removes impurity that can alter the taste. It also prolongs the wine's shelf life. Also, some producers clarify their wine. This is called fining the wine. Here, some producers use things like egg whites, bentonite clay, and fish bladders to cause impurities in the wine to fall to the bottom of the vessel. At this point, the wine is ready to be bottled, sealed, labeled, and put in the boxes for shipping. Oh, and then sent to the market. Now, I'm going to do a real quick overview of white winemaking. Actually, if you follow along on the chart, I'll point out the major differences between white wine and red wine production. One enormous difference, as you can see, white wines are pressed before fermentation. There is little or no solid material present during fermentation. No skins, no seeds, no stems. White wine is nothing more than fermented, clean, clear grape juice. Now, the other major difference is that this white juice is more fragile and vulnerable than red wine juice because of all the stuff that's in the red wine. You can see on the comparative charts that crushing, destemming, and separation of free-run juice is all done right up front before fermentation. Clarification is done up front also rather than at the end like the red wines are done. The alcoholic fermentation, in addition to the yeast, vessels, temperature, and duration, are virtually the same in both red and white wines. Malolactic, or the secondary fermentation, is rare in most white wines. When MLF is used, it adds sort of a buttery dairy type aroma and flavor. The maturation process is virtually the same with one exception. Some whites are made using a technique leads aging, or more technically, sur-lie. Basically, what happens here is that the yeast gobbles up the sugar in the grapes when fermentation has been completed, and the yeast dies and settles onto the bottom of the fermentation vessel. The collection of the dead yeast is known as the lees. The lees add a yeasty aroma and sort of a silky, buttery texture to your mouth. The finishing and bottling are virtually the same. Oh, well, there you have it. Everything you need to know about making wine. That's the science. That's how it's done. The hard part is adding the art to it. The art is taking what anybody can do and turning it into something unique. A beautiful, delicious, tantalizing glass of wine. Hey Posse, thanks so much for investing the time to watch this video. I trust it was helpful to you. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. And please consider hitting subscribe. Also, click here to check out our new online shop. We have a great lineup of wine-related items that will help you get the most out of your wine experience. Oh, and be sure to check out these other videos. Until next time, cheers.